UFC Fight Night, Tom Aspinall versus Marcin Tybura. Welcome to another UFC prediction and analysis video presented by yours truly here at Boxing MMA Picks. Harris flying solo today. Zahn unfortunately could not make it, but the show must go on. We did not want to leave you guys with back-to-back skips. So here I am flying solo to talk about this UFC Fight Night taking place in London, England. 15 fights overall. The crowd would definitely be a factor in this one. If this is your first time watching Boxing MMA Picks, what we're doing is we're giving you fight-by-fight breakdowns and analysis. From that betting perspective specifically, we want to let you know which fights are worth the value, which fights to avoid, which underdog has the best shot at winning, and some parlay action toward the end of the video as well. Please hit the thumbs up on this video. We definitely appreciate that. Please subscribe to the channel here at Boxing MMA Picks. We definitely appreciate that as well. And most importantly, we want to hear from you in the comments. Again, unfortunately, Zahn could not be with us today, but hopefully I can do us all justice and try to get this money for all of us. 15 fights, like I mentioned, 9 of them are on the prelims, 6 of them are on the main card. So let's get started right away with fight number 1 of our prelims. We are looking at Jafel Filho versus Daniel Barez. And in this fight, Jafel Filho, he lost his March debut to Muhammad Mokaev. No shame there. Solid, patient striker, likes the calf kick, likes that continuous forward pressure. Doesn't really have a lot of activity to go along with that. I mean, we see in a small sample size, significant strikes landed per minute at a very low number. That speaks to that lack of activity sometimes, despite the forward pressure. He is a high-level grappler. He can land those takedowns. He has good clinch work and control against the cage. Very patient in those positions as he tries to set up and work the fight to the ground. And on the ground, he's great at scrambling, great at reversing position, great at taking your back, great at the submission attempts. We saw the round 3 moment that he had against Muhammad Mokaev. That would have submitted a lot of fighters. But Mokaev, different beast, survived it, ended up winning the fight. Daniel Barez, on the other hand, he's making his UFC debut. He's on a 4-fight winning streak. Expect forward pressure from him with his striking. He likes the calf kick, has a good jab, good striking speed, good combinations. Very composed stylistically, moves very well around the ring. A lot of knockouts recently, so you can't really overlook that power that he has. And, several submission finishes as well. I've seen him go for takedowns here and there. I wouldn't say his wrestling is a threat per se. As for his grappling, I mean, it's definitely solid. We see Tapology here, 86% on the side of Filho. Be careful with that. I think this fight is a little tough to predict, a little tougher than Tapology is giving it credit for. We don't really know what level Daniel Barez is at, despite looking good during that winning streak that he's currently on. Barez is coming in my opinion, as the better striker here. I think Filho, fair to say, is the better grappler. And normally I would side with the better striker in these situations, but I like Filho to get this one done because I think he's the better overall MMA fighter, right? Filho goes for takedowns. Filho will work the clinch against the cage. The opponents that Barez has been taking on lately, they haven't really been doing that, right? And Filho may be just good enough with the striking by comparison. And I think that's all that he needs, right? So Barez, yes, he can be dangerous, but I think about, how he's looked lately, and I think that has to do a lot with the level of competition that he's faced. Filho has, has faced much higher level of competition comparatively. And I think that's going to be a factor in this one. So Jafel Filho is going to be my pick. I think the odds are close for a reason because it is a little tough to predict. But I think Filho is going to have his way in this one. Second fight, Shauna Bannon versus Bruna Brasil. For Bruna Brasil, she lost to Denise Gomes in her April debut. Very comfortable on the feet. She keeps her hands down. She's methodical. She can be explosive, very dynamic as a striker. Good kicks. She's going to use her kicks to fight from distance. She has a pretty nasty high kick. She can work the ground. She can land takedowns, decent top control to go along with it. decent grappling as well. I wouldn't really call it a strong part of her game. However, I think she's a striker more than anything. And some red flags with her, she leaves the chin up a bit, thinking that she's out of range, but still getting caught. And her cardio definitely seems to be like a red flag as well. For Shauna Bannon, she's making her debut from Invicta. She's undefeated. She's a pretty decent striker from what I'm seeing. Look for some switch stance with her. Look for a lot of fakes and feints in her style. Decent forward pressure, decent activity, decent combinations as well. She also makes good decisions, right? She's patient. She picks her shots well. I give her defensive ground game credit. I think she makes good decisions. She doesn't really take too much damage. She can work her way back up. Offensively, in terms of her ground game, she can definitely land takedowns, smart top control to go along with it. She also can be a bit hittable, so you're going to want to watch out for that. But I will say I like the newcomer, Shauna Bannon, for this fight. I actually like her more times than not in this matchup. Brazil may be the more talented, crisp, better looking striker, but I've seen this in women's MMA before, right? Where that sharper looking striker just isn't as effective. I think Bannon has a more effective skill set in an MMA setting. I think her striking is more intentional. I think her hands are better. I think she has more forward pressure, combinations that should land versus a Brazil that doesn't really have the best striking defense. Bannon as well, I think, has the better wrestling, and I think that's important for this fight. She may not have the better grappling, but I do think her ground IQ is more than capable, especially given that Brazil, she's not any kind of ground specialist by any means. I also factor in the toughness factor, and the fighter that I believe will fight for my money a little bit harder, that fighter is Shauna Bannon. So I think Bannon will remain undefeated. I think Brazil, not really in the best spot in this one. Lack of striking defense is going to allow Shauna Bannon to come forward. Bannon's going to be able to land those takedowns. And Bannon, to me, is just going to be the tougher fighter, the more durable fighter. And as a result, in my opinion, she's going to get it done as the underdog. So I'm looking up for that one. I want to see how they look come weigh in. I think this could be a good spot for Shauna Bannon as the underdog. Fight number 3, Chris Duncan versus Yanal Ashmouz. For Chris Duncan, he's on a 3-fight winning streak. He had that split decision win versus Omar Morales back in March. Good power, 7 of his 10 wins via KO, TKO. He's explosive. He puts a lot into every shot. Relatively basic style, just stylistically with his striking, but he's effective with that style. He's going to march you down. He's, not even necessarily at a high pace, but rather just kind of put that continuous pressure on you. He also has some takedowns. He has some wrestling. 5 takedowns landed in his debut. We'll speak to that. And his cardio also held impressively in his last fight. Yes, big swings. Yes, big misses. He does get hit a few times. Plus those number of takedown attempts, the number of takedowns landed. When you factor all that in, you would think it would have tired him out more, but I was satisfied with his ability to go for 15 minutes. Yanal Ashmouz, on the other hand, beat Sam Patterson in his debut back in March. Ashmouz is a patient striker. He showed big power in his last fight. 4 of his 7 wins are via KO, TKO. Fairly basic striking as well, right? He is a bit hesitant, doesn't really have the best, doesn't really have activity within his offense. He's going to kind of fight off of that back foot, sort of play that counter puncher role. He does train with wrestlers, so he has the IQ there. He can land takedowns. He does have effective ground and pound. He can work his way back up if he is taken down, but I wouldn't really say that ground game is great by any means. And I'm looking at 2 guys with similar styles here. I think the knock on Ashmouz is that he hasn't really faced anyone at a high level. Though you could say the same for Duncan, a win over Omar Morales is legitimate, right? Duncan, to me, is the better striker because he commits to that forward pressure, because he commits to that power. Ashmouz is a bit more reactive, fights off of that back foot. I don't think that's going to serve him well in this fight. Both guys have takedowns. Haven't really seen good takedown defense from Ashmouz. So I can see Duncan capitalizing there as well. And again, despite Tapology showing 75% on the side of Ashmouz. I think that Chris Duncan is the smarter pick here. It's a close fight. The odds definitely indicate it's a close fight. Looks like some money may be coming in on Chris Duncan, with up to minus 150 on some books here. But again, I think Duncan is the smarter pick, and I think again it's a stylistic thing, coming forward, landing takedowns. Otherwise, I'm expecting a close competitive fight here. So I'm going to go Chris Duncan to get it done, but not a safe pick by any means. Fight number 4, Ketlen Vieira versus Pannie Kianzad, women's bantamweight fight here. Going to be a good one. Vieira had that split decision loss to Raquel Pennington back in January. A lot of fakes and feints with the jab to set up her attack. She has a good long jab. She has good timing with her striking, good power behind her striking as well. She has that big overhand right. She has a solid calf kick, but she also has solid combinations to go along with that. She's going to control center. She's going to want to be that fighter coming forward. She can definitely work the clinch. She has good takedowns. She's a judo black belt. She has good grappling. She's a BJJ black belt. Really solid ground and pound to go along with that. Really just a solid overall fighter. And I'm surprised this fight in general is taking place on the undercard, because, these are two fairly highly ranked women's bantamweight fighters here, right? Pannie Kianzad had that unanimous decision win over Lena Landsberg. That was quite a while ago, 17 months ago. So it's been a little while since she has last fought. Kianzad's a good striker, right? Good striker, good active jab, decent movement. She's pretty light on her feet. She is a bit reactive in her style. I don't love that from her. She will fight from the outside at times, but she has solid combinations and she has solid striking IQ. And she, works an effective tie clinch. So think about the elbows, the knees, really, really working those clinch situations. Kianzad, solid UFC level competitor, of course. But I like Vieira for a number of reasons here. I sort of agree with Tapology here, even just in terms of picking Vieira maybe 8 times out of 10 in this one. Although I do think it's going to be a close competitive fight. So I can't even really put the confident tag on Ketlen Vieira in this one, but I still pick Vieira maybe 8 times out of 10 in this matchup. For one, I think Vieira will be that fighter coming forward. Again, Kianzad, she concedes to that pressure against her. We saw that in her last fight. But unlike her last opponent in Lena Landsberg, I think that Vieira has effective forward pressure. Vieira has good power. Vieira has, good boxing, good combinations, and can be more of a threat with that forward pressure. Both fighters have good takedown defense, but Vieira is better at landing the takedowns. So if any fighter is to capitalize there, Vieira is more than likely to be the fighter to do so. I also feel like Vieira may be just physically stronger in this fight. Getting the better of those clinch situations that should arise based on what I'm anticipating. Again, I think it's going to be competitive. I definitely understand the odds here. I think Vieira should be just a bit more effective nearly everywhere in this fight. I would be surprised. I think it's going to take a spectacular performance from Kianzad to get it done. Whereas with Vieira, if she has a somewhat mediocre performance, I still think she has a really good opportunity to get this one done. So stylistically, this one goes to Vieira. I understand the odds. Like I said, 8 times out of 10, I pick Vieira. That said, from the betting perspective, I may be a little cautious in terms of putting this on parlays, but this could be a good value pick. So I really want to see how they look come face off and make a decision from there. Fight number 5, we're looking at Makhmud Muradov versus Bryan Barberena. Barberena, back-to-back losses for him. He lost to Gunnar Nelson back in April. He's introduced as a striker, as a southpaw, a lot of in and out movement, a lot of fake jabs as he looks to set up that left hand. More toughness than skill in my eyes. I know I've kind of made that point about Bryan Barberena a few times, but I wouldn't really call him a high-level striker. Right? He's a bit one-dimensional. He relies on that toughness. He relies on sort of wearing you out. Good continuous work rate. He's tough. That's ultimately what he's going to rely on. Otherwise, suspect takedown defense at 54%. That's definitely where fighters can capitalize against him. I don't think that'll matter in this fight. Makhmud Muradov not really going for takedowns. He had a unanimous decision loss to Kyle Bahalo back in October. Muradov really light on his feet, a lot of movement around the ring, good boxing, good usage of fakes and feints. He picks his shots really well, good pace, good combinations, fights at range, and he's dynamic as a striker. Definitely has that extra gear when he gets comfortable. I'm anticipating a striking battle. Like I said, I don't think the ground game is really going to matter on either side here. I think, look for much better technique out of Muradov in this fight. Look for Barberena to, again, depend on that toughness, depend on that forward pressure. And that could be tricky for anyone. It could be a sticky fight for Muradov as a bigger favorite in this one. But he should get the job done, realistically speaking, right? I mean, key height advantages, key reach advantages. That's going to be a problem for Barberena to try to come in effectively. Muradov's striking should just be too dynamic in this one. And I think Muradov's cardio should be more than good enough to not let Barberena get the better of him as this fight progresses, because that's really what Barberena depends on, is that your cardio is not going to hold up, your IQ is not going to hold up, and as a result, he's going to get the better of you eventually. I don't think that's going to happen in this fight. Muradov should be too good to let that happen. So I'm going to go Muradov. I feel pretty comfortable about this. I think he's going to get the job done. Fight number 6, Mick Parkin versus Jamal Pogues. Heavyweight fight. So right away, we're going to say heavyweight beware on this one. What I mean by that is any fighter can win. It's a heavyweight fight, right? Parkin is making his UFC debut. He competed on Dana White Contender Series almost a year ago. Decent MMA boxing, I would call it. Decent jab, decent overhand right. He's going to try to stay composed. He's going to try to set up those right shots. He's patient, doesn't really force the offense by any means. He'll definitely work that clinch. He'll work the takedown attempts. Expect him to put his weight on you and kind of chain wrestle a bit and try to wear you out. Jamal Pogues, unanimous decision win over Josh Parisian in his February debut. Good jab, good striking speed, good movement for the division. He is a former light heavyweight, so that doesn't surprise me. Once he is controlled, pretty solid boxer. He'll chip away at his opponents. The striking can be a bit one-dimensional, can be a bit predictable at times, but his takedown ability was really impressive in his debut. Good level changes, good wrestling IQ, good clinch work against the cage. He's patient with attempting the takedowns, tries to attempt them in the right environment, and it worked really well for him in his debut. Contrary to Tapology here, I think that Pogues is supposed to be the pick here. I mean, he is the favorite in this fight. Analytically, the striking is probably more diverse on the side of Jamal Pogues. I think he is the better striker, and he proved that he can implement his takedowns at this level, despite being a former light heavyweight. Tossing Josh Parisian around, he landed a number of takedowns in that fight. But I think he's up against an opponent in Parkin who can potentially give him some problems, right? I think Parkin's striking style is going to allow for him to be the fighter coming forward. Parkin a bit more basic in a good way, right? Parkin is also active with his takedown attempts. So I can see both fighters trying to use that against each other. And, again, I think that Parkin has a style that can wear on Pogues, whereas Parisian didn't really go for it against Pogues and doesn't really have that ground game. Parkin does, check those boxes and does have that ability stylistically to potentially wear on Jamal Pogues. Now, don't get me wrong. I do think Jamal Pogues is the better talent here. But Parkin, bigger, true heavyweight, more of a pressing style, and he's fighting at home. Can't forget that factor. I think those factors are going to work well for him, and I think that's going to help him to push him over the edge and get the job done in his debut. Fight number 7, Marc Diakiese versus Joel Alvarez. Really good lightweight fight here for Diakiese. Unanimous decision loss to Michael Johnson. That was back in December. Good overall stand-up, good feints, good movement, solid calf kick. We know he's really athletic and dynamic. Good long jab. He can switch stance. Solid hands. Just a solid kickboxer in general. He can be taken down. He is decent off of his back, though. I'll give him credit for that. He doesn't really let his opponents lay and pray and kind of take control on the ground. I don't think that's going to matter in this one. But what's really important to note with Diakiese is that he's been really committed lately to his wrestling takedowns. He's strong. His takedowns are okay. He has good top control, a bit of a lay and pray type of style, but still active enough to score points effectively. He's going to chain those attempts together. If you do work your way back up, it's something that he's started to implement. And at 30 years old, you imagine stylistically, this is a way for him to, try to find more effective avenues at winning fights. Joel Alvarez lost to Arman Tsarukyan. That was 17 months ago. No shame there. Tsarukyan, high-level fighter, of course. 16 of his 19 wins are via submission. A lot of first-round finishes to his name as well. Good movement on the feet, good jab, nasty calf kick. He's going to use, a good amount of kicks in general to maximize the reach advantages that he typically has over his opponents. He's a good diverse striker. He's dynamic. He can be really explosive, good pressure, good power, picks his shots really well. Not a strong wrestler, but to the point of his submission victories, he is an effective grappler. I think we are going to see, some remnants of Marc Diakiese versus Michael Johnson. Though Diakiese is a good striker, when he's up against another good striker, he can have some troubles kind of commanding control of just the striking exchanges or even commanding control of the octagon. Diakiese, to me, is going to have to rely on takedowns to get it done here. Alvarez has been taken down in 4 of his 6 UFC fights. So it is something that he's very vulnerable to. He doesn't really have great takedown defense by any means. Super legitimate path for Diakiese to get it done to that point, especially when we see, plus 160 as an underdog. But I'm going to side with Joel Alvarez to get it done. I have to trust that his striking is going to take over. Diakiese, yes, he's never been knocked out, so I don't anticipate a knockout. But I want to think that Joel Alvarez does more with the striking. I want to say Joel Alvarez will be prepared for Diakiese attempting takedowns. And I want to say that the 4-inch reach advantage, the 4-inch height advantage are going to be factors in this one. I think this is a really risky fight, right? Diakiese fighting at home, Diakiese having a clear avenue to victory with the takedowns, but Diakiese also being, dare I say, an inconsistent fighter at times, where you don't really know what version of Diakiese is going to show up. If he's sharp, if he's there, he's competing with anyone. If he's not quite there, regardless of how favored he would be, he gets in really sticky situations. So to some degree, it's going to depend on what version of Diakiese shows up. And even on the side of Joel Alvarez, looked really good a few fights ago, looked really bad against Arman Tsarukyan. So, some question marks on both sides here, but I am going to side with Joel Alvarez. I think it's a risky pick. I'm definitely not going to parlay this. I'm not going to bet this at all. But I do think Joel Alvarez will get the job done in this one. Fight number 8, Danny Roberts versus Jonny Parsons. Roberts' 2-fight losing streak. He lost to Jack Della Maddalena back in November. He's introduced as a striker. He'll do a lot of his striking from the outside. He'll move decently. He has a good jab. He'll use his kicks. Don't expect a ground game from him by any means. Very much a striker. He's going to maintain that wide stance to try to avoid wrestling threats coming back his way. Just 57% takedown defense, though, so still vulnerable in that area. He is willing to clinch. He is willing to get in close. Probably cost him in a few fights, but 4 of his knockouts have come from situations that started with knees in the clinch. So he can be a threat. He can be effective. Be mindful of that should this one get close. Jonny Parsons, on the other hand, he hasn't fought in nearly 2 years. He competed on Dana White Contender Series back in October 2021, had that split decision win versus Solomon Renfro. So this fight is going to be his debut. From what I'm seeing with Parsons, patient striker. He's going to try to bait you in with a lot of fakes, kick-heavy approach to his striking. The MMA boxing is pretty solid as well. he's going to kind of stay right in front of you. You know, don't really expect a lot of movement. He is composed, but he is a bit one-dimensional. Only really one approach to his game. Really only has that striking element. The durability is definitely there with Jonny Parsons. The toughness is there. The cardio is there. The consistency is there. And, you know, what I'm anticipating as a result of looking at these two fighters is that this should be a back and forth striking match. I mean, it's a pick 'em in Vegas. So Vegas is letting you know that this one can be back and forth. Vegas is letting you know that both guys should have their moments. This is potentially a split decision type of fight. But there's a few reasons for me to decide with Danny Roberts here. Firstly, again, can't ignore it. O2 Arena, the home crowd. I think that will be a factor in this fight, should it be close. Hence, split decision. Secondly, better movement. Danny Roberts has a lot better movement than Jonny Parsons. I feel like he can use that to his advantage to hit more than he gets hit in this fight. And thirdly, Parsons hasn't fought in 21 months. Parsons has never fought in the UFC, right? So the 21-month layoff, I mean, that could have an impact, whether it's a slow start or whether it's gassing out toward the end. But again, more importantly, just no UFC experience. And your first time is in the O2 Arena where everyone is going against you because their hometown fighter is fighting. So can't be confident on either side, but I'm picking Danny Roberts for the reasons that I mentioned. Final fight of our prelims. Let's look at Davey Grant versus Daniel Marcos. Really interesting bantamweight fight here. Grant is on a 2-fight winning streak. He beat Rafael Assunção back in March. Switch stance, a lot of kicks, a lot of movement. He stays really light on his feet, keeps it super diverse. Good pace, good activity with Davey Grant. Good combinations as well. He can commit to that forward pressure pretty effectively. Hasn't really shown his ground game in his last several fights, I'll say. But he does have good takedowns. Still 1.41 takedowns per fight on paper. Solid grappler as well. Bit vulnerable with respect to takedown defense though, just 62%. So he can be taken down. He can be exposed a little bit there. Daniel Marcos, on the other hand, beat Simon Oliveira. That was his January debut. He's rangy on the feet. He's sharp. Good technique, good calf kick, good combinations. I like his IQ with his striking. I like his movement. Good striking defense as well. Good takedown defense. Good ability to get up if he's taken down. Looks good. Looks fast, looks sharp. I think this is going to be a fun fight. I think we're looking at two similar styles of fighters here, or two similar styles of strikers, I should say, in some ways. And to me, it's really a coin flip type of fight, right? Vegas has Marcos as the slight favorite in this one. I think there's some good value on Grant as an underdog, again, fighting at home. But either way, coin flip type of fight, right? Like I said, Grant may be the better pick here based off of experience. We can't ignore that. We can't ignore, the fighters that Davey Grant has fought at a higher level. When you look at a Assunção, even a Smolka, even a Yanez, Vieira, despite those being losses. Jonathan Martinez is a good win. Even Martin Day. Like, this is a lot of UFC experience to his name, whereas Daniel Marcos hasn't really fought anyone, right? So, and then again, Grant, even though Marcos has good takedown defense, Grant can have that takedown approach. So Grant may be the smarter pick here for a number of different reasons. He's been in there with tougher opponents, has that ground game, like I mentioned, but I am going to side with Daniel Marcos, despite Tapology being on the side of Grant here. And the reason why I'm going to side with Daniel Marcos here is that I think his striking skill, I think his striking speed is going to, come at a bit of a surprise for Davey Grant throughout this fight. Marcos has really good takedown defense, so I think the fight stays on the feet. And like I said, I think Marcos gets the better of the striking exchanges throughout the fight. So I like Daniel Marcos to get it done. He's undefeated. I think he will remain undefeated when this fight is over with. Let's move on to our main card. 6 fights overall on the main card. Fight number 1 is Lerone Murphy versus Josh Culibao. Murphy split decision win over Gabriel Santos back in March. Dangerous striker, quick, explosive, technical, really good footwork, really high IQ as well. He's a high-level boxer, right? A great in and out movement, good fakes and feints, really good calf kick to go along with it. He can switch stance. He can be effective in both stances to that point. Just 43% takedown defense, so he is prone to the takedown. Luckily for him, that won't really matter in this fight because he's going up against Josh Culibao, who has been hot lately. He's on a 3-fight winning streak after beating Melsik Bagdasaryan back in February. Solid stand-up on the side of Josh Culibao. He mixes it up well. Good striking diversity, decent calf kick, good movement, good consistent pace, solid in and out movement, solid clinch as well. He does have some wrestling, although he doesn't have any takedowns to his name in 5 UFC fights. To that point, he can still, implement and that sort of keep you against the cage type of clinching style. So look for that from him. He has a BJJ background as well in case it does go to the ground. So a pretty well-rounded fighter here. I will say this, highly contested fight, but I'm all the way Lerone Murphy on this one. I think Josh Culibao is a very challenging opponent for a lot of fighters. I picked Melsik Bagdasaryan to beat Culibao, for example, right? So, Culibao is that type of fighter that can give a lot of people problems. A lot of legitimate wins on the resume. When you look at Bagdasaryan, when you look at Sung Woo Choi, those 2 alone, very legitimate wins. But I think the skill level is simply too high with Lerone Murphy. I don't see Josh Culibao's style causing Murphy any problems. I can see Murphy outpointing Culibao on this one. I see cleaner striking for Lerone Murphy. And although it'll be competitive, I can see unanimous decision win for Lerone Murphy happening in this one. Maybe 3 rounds to 0, maybe 2 rounds to 1. But I don't think whatever Josh Culibao is going to attempt, I don't think it'll be effective in this fight going up against Lerone Murphy, especially with Lerone Murphy fighting at home. Fight number 2 of our main card, Jai Herbert versus Fares Ziam. Herbert majority decision draw against Ludovic Klein. That was back in March. Very agile, very light on the feet. Keeps his jab hand active, a lot of fake jabs, a lot of touch jabs, jabs at different speeds, long jabs. He's going to set up his offense really well, just working off of that jab. Good movement. Expect him to fight from range with that longer frame that he has, although just 2 inches in reach in this fight, but naturally a longer frame for the division and uses that length. A lot of in and out movement, keeps his opponents guessing. His combinations, they're sharp. His accuracy is there as a striker. Don't forget, he legitimately dropped Ilia Topuria in their last fight, right? Or in their fight, I should say. He could have finished Topuria had he had better IQ in that fight, right? So he is a legitimate striker. He's dangerous for anyone. Just 52% takedown defense, and I think that's where we see fighters beat him. That 52% takedown defense is going to be really interesting in this fight, and I'm going to get to that a little bit later. Fares Ziam beat Michal Figlak back in September. Ziam, kickboxer through and through. Good long jab, good long kicks. Used to be a K1 champion. Good timing on his counter punches, good movement around the ring. He's going to fight from the outside. High technique. He prefers more of a technical fight for sure. Good young prospect, right? But he is someone that struggles a bit with pressure. He can be clipped. He also has bad takedown defense, typically bad ground IQ. So he can be outclassed there, although he won't be by Jai Herbert in this one. Interesting to note that Ziam landed 3 takedowns in his last fight. It looks like something that he is potentially working on. Honestly, those improvements from Ziam, it might be the difference for him, right? Neither guy has good takedown defense, but if Ziam can start landing takedowns, that could be a real difference maker for him. Otherwise, I'm looking at 2 good strikers in this one. We may be looking at a highly technical match. I think Herbert moves a little bit better. I think Herbert is a bit sharper. I think Herbert is a bit more dynamic with more power. So I do think he's the bigger threat with the striking compared to far as ZM. But again, ZM, former K1 champion, legitimate kickboxing experience, plus that X factor of potentially improved wrestling. So I will say this: ZM is the favorite here, and I think I understand why. I will say the odds should be a lot closer. This should be a pick 'em. ZM might be the smarter pick with that X factor if he can actually implement takedowns. But I'm going to have to side with Herbert on this one. I actually really like the underdog value on Jai Herbert here. I don't want to depend on the perception of improved striking from or improved wrestling, I should say, from Fares ZM, just based on one fight. He's going to have to prove me wrong again, ultimately, before I can actually trust that factor from him. In that case, I'm looking at a striking match, and I'm looking at Herbert as the more dangerous striker, where both guys will have moments. I can see a situation where, ZM will touch him one or two times. Herbert maybe covers up pretty well. Herbert touches him one or two times, except ZM does not cover up well. And Herbert gets the better of him in a way that he couldn't against Ilia Topuria. So I like Jai Herbert to get it done, especially as an underdog. He is going to be my pick for that fight. Fight number 3, Andre Muniz versus Paul Craig. This is the middleweight debut for Paul Craig. Paul Craig lost to Johnny Walker, of course, as a light heavyweight. That was back in January. New striking coach for Paul Craig. So he does have improved stand-up. Still has a kick-heavy approach to his game. A lot of fakes and feints to try to get you to bite. Striking defense, not that great. He does have decent takedowns. I mean, that's what he's going to be reliant on to ultimately win his fights. Really good at making positional improvements, opening up his opponents for ground and pound. We know he's a jiu-jitsu fighter. And of course, with Paul Craig, you always have to mention almost all of his wins are via submission. He wants that grappling match. He's going to pull guard for it. He's going to look for it by any means necessary. And Paul Craig fights are always tricky because he's typically losing decisively before coming back and winning with his grappling. So, he clearly has that toughness, clearly has that heart, clearly is a great opportunist, and he's somebody that can be dangerous for anyone. We saw him beat Ankalaev. We saw him beat, the former champion Jamal Hill. So, this is a fighter that could really pull it out against anyone, despite how much that fighter may be beating him throughout the fight, right? He's taking on Andre Muniz, who lost to Brendan Allen back in February. Thing about Muniz, grappler first as well. Of his 23 wins, 15 of them are via submission. He's a southpaw on the feet. He's light. He's bouncy in his stand-up. He has a long jab. He's going to throw a lot of kicks. He's going to use his length. He's going to use his reach. Doesn't have the advantages in this fight. I mean, he's a slightly shorter fighter, 2 inches in reach advantage. So it's not like he has a big advantage to take advantage of here, but he'll fight from distance. He'll use a lot of fakes and feints. He has good timing, well-versed as a striker. He's big. He's physically strong. He's good at landing takedowns as well to set up that superior grappling at almost 3 takedowns per fight. Like I said, new weight class for Paul Craig. I think that alone is going to put a lot of question marks into this fight. Especially when you move down from light heavyweight down to middleweight. That's a 20-pound cut, right? From 205 down to 185, as opposed to the other weight classes that are just a 10-pound difference. Both good grapplers, but I'll give Craig the credit here of being more dangerous, dare I say. The fact that they're both grappling specialists, however, I think that actually favors Andre Muniz. And I say that favors Andre Muniz because Craig is more reliant on that component to win his fights. With respect to striking, Craig historically has not been good. I do think Muniz should have the advantage there, despite Craig making striking improvements. I think this is anyone's fight. I think there's value on Paul Craig as the underdog. Plus 180 seems a little too steep. I expect Paul Craig to maybe be the tougher guy, to fight a little harder for you in that 3rd round. Those are very important factors to consider. But I'm ultimately going to side with Andre Muniz on this fight because I feel like he's flat out the better fighter. I think he's going to have a striking advantage. He's a very advanced grappler to keep himself safe against Paul Craig, if nothing else. I think Muniz can also land those takedowns and use his top game to his advantage because he's not worried about the grappling threat that Paul Craig should offer him because he is also a high-level grappler. So I like Andre Muniz to get it done, kind of defend the middleweight division, guys who move down in weight. It's not always an easier fight for them. So I do think Muniz makes it tough on Paul Craig, and I think Muniz will get the job done in this fight. Fight number 4 of the main card, Nathaniel Wood versus Andre Fili. Wood is on a 2-fight winning streak. He beat Charles Jourdain back in September. Looked really good. That was his featherweight debut. He was moving up in weight in that situation. Looked really good in his debut. And here for another one against a good opponent. Wood is a pretty good overall fighter. You know, good on the feet, fundamentally, moves well, clean hands, good combinations, good timing, quick jab, good striking IQ. He can work the cage. He can use the clinch. He can land the takedowns. The top control is really knowledgeable. Again, just a really good overall fighter. Taking on Andre Fili, who, you know, you can say a lot of the same things about. Split decision win over Bill Algeo back in September. The thing with Andre Fili, he finds himself in a lot of close fights. That's always going to be concerning from a betting perspective. You mean you look at his UFC record, 10-8 in the UFC. So that tells you don't really know what's going to happen in an Andre Fili fight. But like I said, he is a solid overall fighter. He has solid stand-up. He has decent wrestling. He has takedowns. He has grappling. Good long jab, good active jab. Likes to march you down. He'll come forward a lot, and he's definitely willing to engage. Decent scrambling ability on the ground if he's taken down. He does have a good defensive guard as well. Really, again, just one of those fighters with no glaring weakness in their game. And to the typical Andre Fili script, I do expect a well-contested matchup here. But let me keep the prediction part of it pretty short. I'm siding with Nathaniel Wood here, and I'm siding with Nathaniel Wood at least 9 times out of 10 in this matchup. I think he's more well-versed in virtually every category. I think he's sharper. I think the speed advantage will be present, will be evident. And I don't think he's not going to fade. So I expect a unanimous decision win for Nathaniel Wood here, as long as he doesn't make any mistakes. But it will be a tough fight. It will be an entertaining fight. But Andre Fili should just simply come up short. Nathaniel Wood should get the job done. And I really like the value here at minus 205. We'll talk about that toward the end of the video. But let's move on to our co-main event, Molly McCann versus Julia Stoliarenko. McCann lost to Erin Blanchfield in November. No shame there. Blanchfield is a beast. McCann, typically a fast starter, brawler type in the stand-up. Her striking is solid. She can switch stance, has a good overhand hook. Look for her to press forward. She sits on her punches, good power, just good boxing overall is something I'll also give her credit for. She can land takedowns, 1.7 takedowns per fight. I wouldn't consider her to be a high-level wrestler by any means, but she can land the takedown. My biggest gripe whenever considering betting on her is that, kind of like Andre Fili, she's always in a fight that's going to look 50-50. She's tough. She can brawl. She has a lot of heart. She has that explosive knockout power at any point in the fight. Plus, she's fighting at home. And Molly McCann at home makes a big difference in her fights. Stoliarenko lost to Chelsea Chandler back in October. Stoliarenko also has a brawling type of stand-up. However, with Stoliarenko, there's not much technique involved. Her boxing, it is improved, but it's still well below average in my opinion. She can land takedowns. She also pulls guard a lot in attempt to find those arm bars, to find those leg locks. To that point, her grappling and her submission attempts, they are legitimate. They are a legitimate threat. I think all but one of her wins are via submission, including her last fight, or including her last win, I should say. Cardio is also a huge problem for Julia Stoliarenko. I'll say this, because I don't want to spend too much time here. Stoliarenko, to me, one of those Paul Craig type of fighters who can pull out a submission from anywhere. So you want to be careful from a betting perspective if you're on the side of Molly McCann. Otherwise, I'm looking at Molly McCann as a sizable favorite here for a reason. I don't even think this fight was really set up to be competitive. I think it was set up to appease to the O2 Arena, appease to the crowd. Molly is their fighter. They love her there. She loves them. She should be significantly better as a striker here. And Molly McCann is who I'm talking about. I think McCann can capitalize on Stoliarenko also being a brawler. I think McCann can catch Stoliarenko in a brawling exchange type of situation. And I think McCann can really end the fight early. Stoliarenko also has zero cardio. So even within that first round, I can see Stoliarenko completely gassing out. I think Stoliarenko's only chance is early takedown, find the submission. Molly McCann does not have good takedown defense, so I do think that could be a legitimate path for Julia Stoliarenko. But you can't bet on that. Even as an underdog, you can't bet on she has to land an early takedown and land a sub. Don't want to bet on that. I think Molly's going to be too prepared here for that one threat that Stoliarenko is providing. And I think, Molly McCann gets the job done. I think Molly McCann may even get the finish here. So Molly McCann should make the O2 Arena real happy, should get the job done, potentially gets a finish as well. So let's look out for that. Main event time. Let's talk Tom Aspinall versus Marcin Tybura. Aspinall, he had that knee injury last year versus Curtis Blades, of course. 1 year later, he is back. Very well-rounded, one of the top heavyweight prospects, good striker, good boxing in particular. He's going to switch stance, good movement. The timing is good. He's quick for a heavyweight, good striking speed, good combinations. The takedowns are there as well. The ground game is legitimate, very legitimate grappler. His top control is great. Good ground and pound as well. He's shown us hints of everything at this point. And, I think in this fight, it's more so going to be about what does he look like after the injury? Is he still the Tom Aspinall that was leading up to before the injury? We're going to have to take a look at that. Marcin Tybura is on a 2-fight winning streak after a unanimous decision win over Blagoy Ivanov back in February. Good boxing, especially in close quarters. Good movement for the division. Good counterpuncher, especially with the jab. He also uses his kicks pretty effectively. Good steady pace is probably my favorite thing about Marcin Tybura. He's consistently scoring points without really exerting a large amount of energy at any point in time. Decent striking defense. He stays pretty calm. He stays pretty composed. He can box in both stances. Also has the ground game. Almost 1.5 takedowns per fight. Good takedown defense as well at 80%. Very relevant for this one. Just like I said, good toughness, good cardio, good experience, good composure. A lot of good things to like about Marcin Tybura. But let me keep this really short from a prediction perspective. Tom Aspinall's minus 450. I think it's for a reason. Tom Aspinall all the way on this one. Tapology has Aspinall at 95%. I completely agree there. I think Aspinall is just better in every category, right? I think Tybura is one of those fighters that is a good win on your resume, a good challenge, a fighter that can do everything. He's going to help to confirm what level Aspinall is at. But we've sort of already seen what level Aspinall is at, right? Aspinall has, a win over Alexander Volkov, a win over Sergey Spivak. These are fighters in Spivak and Volkov that are better than Tybura. And Aspinall has already proven himself against them. So here's another one of those situations. Tom Aspinall is going to be able to prove himself as the big favorite. I think he's going to have no problem getting the job done here. Aspinall is going to be my pick. So with that, let me take it to Vegas. Let's look at some of these odds. Let's talk about underdogs. Let's talk about parlay action as well. When I look at the underdogs, first of all, there's a lot of close fights here. There are a number of underdogs that have some value. For example, I think Shauna Bannon has value as an underdog. I think that Michael Parkin has value as an underdog. I think even Marc Diakiese has value as an underdog if he uses that wrestling. My sort of pick for, underdog of the card I really like Jai Herbert in this spot. I don't completely believe in Fares Ziam, and I think Herbert fighting at home will make a difference. Like I said, more dangerous striker, better movement. I think he gets the job done there. And in terms of parlay action, I'm looking at a few fights. I mean, there are some of the obvious players. McCann could be an obvious player. Aspinall could be an obvious player. Um, I'm trying to think who else off the top of the head. There could be some obvious players there, but I noticed with co-main and main events, anything could happen. So I try to stay away from those. In terms of who I'm actually looking at parlaying, I like Muradov a lot in this spot. I think he's just flat out better than Bryan Barberena. And what Bryan Barberena relies on, I don't think is going to work against Muradov. Probably my favorite pick of the card is Lerone Murphy. And I really like the value on Lerone Murphy here at a 1.66. And third pick would be Nathaniel Wood. Like I said, Feely, tough opponent, but Wood just should be flat out better, quicker as well, and looked good moving up in weight. So I'm confident in that factor from him as well, despite being the smaller fighter. Those three fights could have some pretty decent value at a 3.25. And what that means is that $100 is going to return 325 for our bigger bettors. $250 is going to return a total of 812. Let's sign off on that note. This has been UFC Fight Night, Aspinall versus Tybura, by yours truly here at Boxing MMA Picks. Please make sure you subscribe to the channel at Boxing MMA Picks. We can use those follows. We can use those shares. Please hit the thumbs up on this video. Share the video with anyone that you know that needs some UFC prediction and analysis, specifically from that betting perspective. And most importantly, want to hear from you in the comments. How do you feel about my underdog pick? How do you feel about my parlay picks? What potential parlay picks are you looking at? What additional insight are you looking for? More than happy to provide that. More than happy to provide, some additional context in whatever you're looking for. But you got to make that be known in the comments. Let's officially sign off from there. UFC Fight Night, Tom Aspinall versus Marcin Tybura. Boxing MMA Picks. Harris flying solo today. But in either way, let's get this money.